As a law student at Yale, Senator Cory Booker made a bold decision. He would move into a housing project in a tough neighborhood in Newark. He'd grown up in Harrington Park, New Jersey, a lily-white suburb where his father would joke they were 4 raisins in a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream. He had a good life in Harrington, a life of opportunity. But the roots of the Booker family were in the Black community of Newark, and Senator Booker was of a mind to make a difference there. One of Newark's nastiest human warehouses. That's how Esquire magazine described brick towers on Martin Luther King Boulevard. That's where Cory Booker made his home while commuting to New Haven, Connecticut. That's where he met Miss Virginia Jones, a tenant organizer whose own son was murdered in that building. One day, Miss Jones asked Senator Booker to describe their neighborhood. He began to talk about the troubles he saw, the drug dealing, the abandoned buildings, the projects, when she stopped him cold and said, "Boy, you need to understand that the world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you see inside of you. And if you're one of those people who only sees darkness and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you see hope and opportunity, if you're stubborn enough every time you open up your eyes to see love and the face of God, then you can make a difference." That moment changed Cory Booker. It changed the way he saw the world and his place in it. Ever since, he's been determined to connect to the love within himself, to see and hear and act from a place of love, which he admits isn't always easy. It's why he's become one of the most articulate and, more importantly, thoughtful voices on the issues of racial justice in America. And what about us? What do we see? What do we see when we look in the hard places, the grim places of the world, the slums, the refugee camps, the war zones, all the places where people suffer and struggle for dignity? The knee on the neck of a man, strangling the life out of him. The shooting of a woman in her own home. The hunting down of a man who's just out for a run. The 7 bullets fired in the back of another. The use of brute force against American citizens of every age, race, ethnicity, and religion, peacefully protesting against police brutality and systemic racism. And those words weren't easy for me to say because I'm a former Jewish chaplain of the Philadelphia Police Department, and my younger brother was both a deputy sheriff and police officer. The violence and looting, the deadly vigilantism, the armed protesters who stormed state legislatures demanding the end of COVID stay-at-home orders, the viral videos of the Karens, of the angry people who won't wear a mask while shopping at Walmart or Costco, the Twitter rants, the incitement, the stoking of disunity and division. What do we see when we look at those people with whom we disagree vehemently? Do we see only darkness, or do we see light? Do we see love? Do we see the face of God? What do we see out there? And what do we see when we look inside of ourselves? We all want to see love and hope and opportunity. But sometimes it's hard to see the light. We harbor hurts disappointments, pains, struggles, and fears. These affect our vision, like seeing the world through a dark set of lenses. In today's Torah reading, our matriarch Sarah has difficulty seeing the light. Blinded by her anguish, she sees Ishmael as a threat, a rival to her son Isaac, and a challenge to her own dignity. He was an innocent child, little Ishmael, just a boy, laughing and playing. Yet all she could see in him was her own pain and her own suffering. Consumed with rage, she cast him out into the scorching desert to a certain near death. Only God sees the boy Ba'asher as he really is, a small, fragile human being who did nothing to deserve his fate. Abraham, too, has faulty vision. He fails to see his wife, Sarah, Ba'asher as she is broken and devastated by her infertility, supplanted by her handmaiden. Abraham doesn't see Sarah's desolation. He doesn't hear her cries or understand her silence. I remember asking a group of students whether they feel that they've ever been heard, that someone has really heard them, gets them, and understands what hurts and what's hard for them. They all understood what I was asking. Most said, rarely. Some said, never. It's not just teens. Rarely, if ever, do we feel that we are really heard, that we are seen as we want to be seen, and truly understood. My mother did everything she could to make me feel loved and affirmed. With my mom, I always felt safe. I always felt that I could be who I was. And here's the interesting thing. Because she saw and heard me, I always wanted to be the best in her eyes. She brought out the very best in me. When we see the good in others and affirm it, we help them to see it and to express it more fully. My father mostly saw the externals. To him, I was the undisciplined, nerdy, chubby kid who didn't clean his room. He didn't see me, and he didn't hear me. At least not the way that I wanted to be seen and I wanted to be heard. He made me feel judged, and that made me feel angry. I know he loved me, but I really didn't feel it as a kid, and he certainly didn't bring out the best in me. Looking back, I wonder what hurts he carried that caused him to see things the way that he did. I can't claim to know, because the truth is, I didn't really see him either. Rarely, if ever, do we feel that we are really heard, that we are seen as we want to be seen, and truly understood. The history of oppressed peoples often begins with a story being told about them that's imposed upon them, invariably cruel and filled with lies. Such stories turn people into caricatures just to justify mistreating them. Jews are greedy. Mexicans are drug smugglers, rapists, and murderers. Muslims are terrorists. Black people are lazy and dangerous. By imposing such labels on others, we define them in ways that strip them of their humanity. Consider those people with whom we disagree, those who have a different political or worldview. How often can we honestly claim that we know and understand what's going on inside of them, what's in their hearts, what pains them in their guts? It's so easy, so tempting to impose our own narratives on others. Oh, They're a redneck. They're a liberal. They're a settler. They're a Palestinian. As if labels really tell us who they are, what burdens them, or what love and goodness they may have in their souls. To pin a label on another is to rob them of their story and replace it with our own making. It is a form of tyranny that turns people into objects and denies them their dignity. Do we remember how not long ago, African-American NFL players who took a knee during the national anthem were vilified, accused of being defiant, disloyal, un-American? Now athletes from other sports leagues, athletes of all colors, from the NBA, the WNBA, the NHL, MLB, MLS, even players in the English Premier League are doing the same, and actually walking off their respective fields of play in solidarity with the victims of racial inequality and police brutality. Now we can see their protest for what it really is: a cry to be seen and heard as part of a community that is in pain, a community that has never overcome the gravest of indignities of being treated as objects, literally bought and sold. Black lives do matter just as much as any other life. We now understand better why they resorted to this measure. When we watched former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin deliberately press his knee on George Floyd's neck for nearly 8 minutes, while George Floyd cried out for air and for his deceased mother, most Americans finally grasped what Colin Kaepernick and others had been protesting against. We collectively asked ourselves, has our country done enough to make people of color feel seen and heard? Have we done enough to live up to the truth we declared to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights? These players and the hundreds of thousands of peaceful protesters are speaking truth to power, which is a political religious tradition that goes all the way back to Moses, who confronted Pharaoh. They deserve to be heard ba'asherhem, respectfully and fully, and encouraged to express the pain that's in their hearts. If we view them from a place of love, we will see their love for their people, their love for the promise of this nation that they yearn to see fully realized. If we look at them with loving eyes, we will see this, and anger can give way to understanding and even healing. When I was in Israel last year at the Shalom Hartman Institute, which now feels like a lifetime ago, I met a Palestinian man who has learned to see the face of God in all people. His name is Ziad Zabatin, and he's from the West Bank town of Husan. Ziad was imprisoned at the age of 15 for throwing stones at Israeli soldiers. While behind bars, he and a circle of fellow inmates began to take a hard look at themselves, to ask themselves, who are we? And what do we want to be? Together, they decided to turn from violence and pursue the path of peace. Upon release, they found like-minded Israelis and formed an organization called Combatants for Peace. One day, Ziad was protesting the construction of a fence that would completely encircle his Palestinian town, when to his surprise, he saw a group of Jewish settlers who had come to join the demonstration. Among them was Nahum Pechenik, a student of Rabbi Menachem Froman, the rabbi of the nearby settlement of Tekoa. Rabbi Froman of blessed memory believed the heart of the problem is the heart of the solution. That faith in God would bring the two peoples together as brothers and sisters. He said, you have to love your neighbor. It's a mitzvah. And the Palestinians are my neighbors. So the love of the Palestinians is the essence of my religion. Menachem Froman was an eccentric figure who did some pretty controversial things like befriending Yasser Arafat. But even his detractors will grant him this. His love of God moved him to love all people and to see the image of God in every human being. Ziad was so inspired by this love that he, a devout Muslim, became Rabbi Froman's student and disciple. To this day, he wells up with emotion when he describes how his rabbi made him feel seen and heard and loved. And every day, Ziad strives to honor that love by spreading his rabbi's teachings. But this story doesn't end here. When word got out that Ziad had befriended Jewish settlers, his partners in Combatants for Peace, they were enraged, especially the Jewish ones, and they asked him to leave the group. As principled, well-meaning, and dovish as they were, for them, Nahum Pechenik and Rabbi Froman were settlers and nothing more. I understand their reaction. The label settler didn't come out of thin air. Ziad's friends had seen heinous acts of terror committed by settlers, just as Israelis have witnessed unspeakable atrocities committed by Palestinians. The pain is real on both sides. The Bible tells us to hate evil and love the good. We must not be silent or indifferent to evil, but standing against it does not require that we become hateful people. It must not blind us to the good that is deserving of our love. To be fully vindicated and effective, the struggle against evil must come from a place of love and be conducted in the name of love. Congressman John Lewis of blessed memory was a role model and exemplar of this spirit. He was a fierce warrior and a man of love. And we saw in the wake of his death, as he was admired and loved by people of such diverse backgrounds and political philosophies. Given the beatings, the degradations, the over 40 arrests he endured, he might have turned out differently. He might have soured on humanity, become embittered and angry, bent on vengeance. Instead, he turned his suffering into steely resolve that no human being should be mistreated or debased. He didn't let his oppressors rob him of his humanity. And so he never lost his ability to see and feel the humanity of others. According to the Talmud, the Second Temple was destroyed because of sinat chinam, baseless, gratuitous hatred. But it doesn't lay the blame at the feet of any particular party. The whole community is implicated in a cycle of hateful and callous acts that generated angry and vindictive responses. It is hard to find the precise beginning, but we all know the tragic ending. One Jewish faction opened the gates of Jerusalem to the Roman legion in order to vanquish a rival Jewish group. The message of our tradition is clear. Hatred brings destruction. That kind of reckless contempt is rampant in America today. Vulgarity flows from the highest places, threatening to engulf our precious democracy with a tidal wave of hate. According to the Anti-Defamation League's 2019 audit of anti-Semitic acts, its most recent report, the Jewish community experienced the highest level of anti-Semitic incidents the last year since tracking began in 1979. There are more than 2,100 acts of assaults, vandalism, and harassment reported across the United States, including the horrific assaults that were perpetrated in Poway, New Jersey, Jersey City, Muncie, New York, and a spree of violent assaults in Brooklyn. Anti-Semitic incidents increased 125 over the year before, with an increase of 56% in assaults. There were as many as 6 assaults for every day of the calendar year. It is the highest level of anti-Semitic activity ever recorded by the ADL. And this year, we need no look further than outside of the doors of this sanctuary here on Mercer Island, where young people are sharing the most hateful, awful, horrific anti-Semitic literature and memes and comments on social media. It's not that there is actually more anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, misogyny, and xenophobia. It's that those who should be the role models of decency have debased themselves and our society by speaking, tweeting, and blogging vile obscenities and hate speech that would have once gotten your mouth washed out with soap. It is time, long past time, to break the cycle of hate. Proverbs 26:4 says, "Don't respond to a fool, lest you become like him." And in the very next verse, it says, "Respond to a fool, lest he be righteous in his own eyes." The rabbis wrestle with the seeming contribution. Don't respond, do respond. Eventually, they come to the following conclusion. We must not descend to the level of the fool, and yet there are lies and obscenities that must not be left unchecked. The challenge is to know when and how to respond. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Kook, the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, taught that the best and most powerful response to hate is love. The antidote to baseless hatred, to sinat chinam, is ahavat chinam, generous, bold, gracious love, courageous love. He was a vigorously ultra-Orthodox Jew, but he loved all members of the Yishuv, the Jewish community of British Mandate Palestine, including the most secular of kibbutzniks. When it came to theology, to religious observance, to overall worldview, he shared very little with these very irreligious pioneers. But he deeply admired their efforts to build and settle the land and saw God's providence in the work of their hands, and he loved them for it. Courageous love is a love that is willing to take risks, to suspend judgment, to give the benefit of the doubt, and to listen, to really listen. It takes courage, because listening with empathy means opening ourselves up to feel the pain of others, to feel it in our own hearts. And that makes demands on us. It obligates us. Just as we would act to alleviate our own pain, we are compelled to ease the suffering of our sisters and brothers, to protect them from harm to their body or to their dignity. Real love, true love, obligates, but it also liberates. It takes us out of the prison of the self and binds us to others in real relationships, which is the essence of life. We are born to such love, and it is as vital to our souls as oxygen is to our bodies. The bold reclamation of real love must be our guiding light if we are to overcome the discord and division of our time. But it demands that we also be challenged. There is so much healing to be done because there is so much suffering and deprivation. And true love cannot tolerate such grave injustice. But in honoring love, we will find joy and uplift, wholeness and peace. A few days ago, while driving to Seward Park, I saw God. Just by chance, I found myself driving down MLK Way, and there I saw the face of God. I saw God in the faces of the people on the street. And I thank Cory Booker and Miss Virginia Jones for opening my eyes. Now, hopefully, your eyes to the truth that God is there just as God is on MLK Boulevard in Newark, New Jersey. And not just in those places, but in the faces of God's children everywhere. Joy welled up in me. I felt love flowing from my heart. And I knew that I was blessed, that we are blessed. Praised are you, God, for having made us in your image. Blessed are you, God, for we see you in ourselves and in each other. In this coming year, may we all dedicate ourselves to love one another with a generous, bold, and courageous love. Ken Yehi Ratzon. And let us say, Amen.